The story of Joshua Elishev could be your story. It could be your son's story. A story of a smart kid, perhaps too smart for his own good. After a near perfect SAT score, Joshua was educated in prison, not the Naval Academy. The author of the gripping new book, Privilege Lost, gives an oral account of his life before, during, and after his 5 years in prison in this 12-part podcast series, Losing Privilege. Hi, everybody. Welcome once again, Losing Privilege. Joshua, where we left off, we were talking about hope. Hope. And, you know, I think about this word, and I'm really curious, where do you find hope when you're in prison? Let's go back a second, rewind just a little bit. You were facing an additional 30 years in prison because of some things that had taken place. Let's go back, talk a little bit about why you were facing so much additional time.
Okay. So I defended myself against this officer when he had assaulted me. And he was the brother-in-law for the only felony judge in the county, to the best of my knowledge. It was a good old boy, small town. Everybody knew each other. The prison industry, the jail, that was the only industry that kept the town alive. So they didn't discharge me with battery or self-defense. They enhanced the charge to battery on a law enforcement officer, because the fine print in Florida's statutes defines law enforcement officer as police officer, firefighter, paramedic, EMT, mall security guard, includes correctional officers, jail and prison staff. So even the nurse or an administrator in a jail or prison is considered a law enforcement officer if for the purposes of enhancing the severity of a crime. So they added that. And then they added aggravated as a secondary enhancement. So battery became battery on a law enforcement officer, became aggravated battery on a law enforcement officer. The definition of the aggravated enhancement is permanent disfigurement or severe bodily harm. I fractured his nose, and they considered that severe bodily harm. So they took a charge that would have carried a maximum of 5 years and enhanced it to a charge that had a minimum of 5 years, a maximum of 30.
So at that point, you're facing 30 years in prison. This is, let's remind everybody, you're in prison right now, essentially, because you cashed a check and deposited an additional $52 into your pocket. Should have been, most likely by most accounts, a slap on the wrist, maybe a fine, some probation. That's not the way this goes down. So now you're how many years into your initial sentence when you have this decision, plead guilty 5 years, roll the dice 30, but you're not going to do any better than 5?
So I was less than 3 months into the whole process when the assault happened. After the better part of a year of being tortured, beaten 3 times a day, starved, after about a year of that, I finally reached the tipping point where they had to either take it to trial, get a conviction, or drop the charge. The court process is slow, but it does have a finite lifespan. And so when I got to about the 13-month mark, that's about where I pled guilty. And I pled guilty to it.
What goes through your mind? Here's where I want to go with this, because we've already told this story on a previous episode. What goes through your mind when you're sitting there after everything you've been through mentally and physically over the last year to 18 months. Now you have to make a decision. Do I take another 5 years? Do I roll the dice on 30? When in your mind, at some point, did it dawn on you, I shouldn't even be here at all?
Not a single day went by that it didn't run through my head, I shouldn't even be here at all. I will take full responsibility for the fact that I failed to notify the government that they had overpaid me. It was not a deliberate or malicious act. I was heartbroken. It just wasn't high on my list of priorities. So I definitely was overpaid, right? I definitely got money I wasn't entitled to. Should have been a slap on the wrist. It should never have resulted in incarceration of any kind, certainly not 18 months, 15 months, or even 5 years. So not a single day went by that I didn't think this isn't really meant for me. There's a mistake. I shouldn't be here. And then the entire additional 5 years that I got, every single day that went by, I shouldn't be here had I not been subject to a personal vendetta by a federal agent on that. I would never have even been in a situation to have to defend myself. So the extra 5 years was entirely something that I should have avoided. I shouldn't be here went through my head every day. And
so where does the hope come from?
Well, check this out. Imagine how you would try to find hope when you're less than 3 months away from where you should have gone home on the original 15 months, and you're just now pleading guilty to the 5 more years, because it was 13 months in when I pled guilty to the battery and got the 5 years. I had an 18-month sentence that would have put me home at 15 months. So I was 2 months away from coming home. And I had to stare that in the face, that I was just about to start a 5-year prison sentence for defending myself in a situation I should never have been forced to be in the first place. As far as hope goes, there were times that there was no hope. There were days, weeks, months when I forgot what hope felt like. The first 2.5 years, there was no hope. The only hope was that today is, please let them kill me today.
You really had that mindset that you would rather be dead than where you were.
Yes, absolutely. And to this day, my wife, my family, all of my friends, they know that should I ever find myself in a situation where I would be forced to choose, I would choose to die before ever having handcuffs put on me again or risk going through this again. But through that entire time, the first 2.5 years, daily, I wished that they would kill me, that an inmate would kill me, that the guard would kill me, that I'd slip and fall and crack my head on something metal. I prayed for it. I wished for it. That was the only hope I had, was that today was going to be the last day, that somehow my life would.
That's not really hope. I mean, let's break this down for a second. You're a pretty intelligent guy. The word hope, when most people think of having hope, especially in a situation like being in prison, you're hoping to get out, and yet you are hoping that the out would be death.
No, I disagree.
Okay.
The hope is not to get out. The hope is simply for something better. There are thousands of people who don't ever have a chance of getting out, life or multiple life sentences without parole from 16, 17, 18 years old all the way through. Some of these guys, the hope is never to go home. They know they're never going home. The hope is usually defined as wanting something better. And so for most people who have a definitive release date, yes, the hope for something better equates to getting out. But for nearly as many people, hope has nothing to do with getting out. Hope might just be, you know what? I hope that the food that they serve today in the chow hall isn't rotten. That for some people, that is hope. Like, I really hope that I get vegetables that grown men didn't have sex with before serving them onto my plate. Like, really, that's a really screwed up thing to have to hope for. But for some of these guys,
I would say so.
For some of these guys, hoping that they would be served food that grown men did not have sex with before it was served is hope. That is hope for something better than what they're accustomed to. So hope doesn't have to be the hope to go home. It could just be for any type of relief or change that is less bad than what you are currently going through. And for me, for the first 2.5 years, the less bad thing that I hoped for was that somebody would kill me, because what I was being subject to was worse than death.
Got to ask the question. Did you ever attempt to take your own life?
No, because not while I was incarcerated. No, I didn't. Because I'm intelligent enough to know that if you're going to take your life, the whole point of taking your life is to eliminate pain. And there is no method accessible to accomplish that while incarcerated that doesn't increase or worsen your suffering along the way, even if it succeeds. So I have attempted to kill myself since coming home from prison because the trauma haunts me so severely. But the methods that would have ended suffering without enhancing it were not available in prison. So no, I never attempted to harm myself while I was incarcerated. The guys have the ability to maybe cut themselves if they can get something and sharpen it on the asphalt, or use a sheet and attempt to hang themselves off of their bunk. But that's about the extent of the options that are available for inmates wishing to harm themselves. And neither one of those are guaranteed to succeed, but both of them are guaranteed to increase suffering, whether they do or don't. That was not my hope, was not to have things get worse before they got better.
Let's go back to the 4-letter word, hope.
Yeah.
You're 2.5 years in. Did you have hope that you were eventually going to get out? Because you went from 3 months to 15 months. Now you're 2.5 years in. You pled guilty to another 5 years. Did you think that there was going to be another fight, that there was going to be another charge, that it was just going to keep getting piled on and piled on and piled on, and instead of being there, for a short period of time, it was going to turn into your life sentence?
I can tell you that the reason why hope really started at the 2.5 year mark is because that was the halfway point. At the 2.5 year mark, I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. The amount of time ahead of me was equal to or less than the amount of time that was behind me. So it was downhill. At the 2.5 year mark, I also got transferred from the most violent, worst condemned prison in the entire state of Florida to a place that, while it wasn't great, it was a hell of a lot safer. So those happened at about the same time. The place that was a hell of a lot safer was 8 hours closer to my family. So the hope that I might get a visitor to break up the monotony, the boredom, and the horror of the place, that was a new hope that came with that halfway point and being relocated. Those were where the hope started, right? That's where it started for me, for hope. And along with the hope, along with the hope, yes, there was a fear of something could happen. It could add more time again. And get now that I'm past the halfway point, everything is a bigger threat than it was before. You get into a fight with somebody, you knock them out, but you break their tooth. Boom, you've got a few extra years added on. Like everything ran a risk. Somebody comes into your room and they have a cell phone with them. Boom, you just added a year onto your sentence because they take away a year of your good behavior time, just for being in the same room as the person who had the phone. So the strength of hope is it gives you something to live for, something to strive for, something to focus on. Hope is also the greatest weakness of humankind, because as soon as you have hope for something, you have a fear of losing or never getting that same thing. The absence of hope also equates into the absence of fear. If you don't have any hope, you also don't have anything to lose. It can't get any worse when there's no hope. But as soon as you have hope, it can get worse. And it can get worse. And so the hope is balanced by that anxiety, by that fear. Yeah, now I can see going home. I hope I make it there. I hope nothing happens along the way to jeopardize it. I hope my family comes to see me. I hope I get a good roommate this time and I don't have somebody that pulls out his junk and starts tugging on it every time a female officer walks by. Like, those were all great hopes. And they definitely came with the fear of, okay, well, now if somebody tries to pick a fight with me, I can either become a victim or I can defend myself, but defending myself runs the risk of additional time.
And did that happen?
Getting additional time or having to defend
No. Facing additional time, getting into a fight, having to defend yourself or make the decision to be a victim.
It did, repeatedly. In fact, when I got to that halfway point, I had been in prison long enough that I had learned the language, the politics, how to move and to interact. I had also learned what you could and could not do if you wanted your time to be peaceful or as uneventful as it could be, to stay safe, right? You can't let yourself be a victim, but you also can't go looking for trouble. If you're the idiot that brings trouble everywhere, you're going to get hurt. And if you're the idiot who doesn't stand up for themselves, you're also going to get hurt. So it's a balance. And I had learned around that point in time. But finding hope also means that now you've got something to fight for. With no hope, you've got nothing to lose, but you also don't have anything to care about. So it's much easier to walk away from altercations when you really don't care about anything.
It's a tremendous dichotomy.
It is, because now it's, I'm getting ready to go home. I see everything as a threat, and so now I have things. You bring a cell phone into my room. Well, I got to decide: am I going to fight with you so that it becomes known? Don't bring this into my room. Don't risk it, or do I do nothing? Because the fight could risk adding more time. I could hurt you. You could hurt me. I might not go home. But you getting caught with a cell phone in my cell would accomplish the same thing. So now I have to choose, right? Which one's more dangerous? And I did. I did frequently. I ended up getting into more fights in my last 2 years than in the first three, because I had learned how to move. I had learned how to navigate. I had learned how to judge the situations when I needed to fight to defend myself, when I didn't. But I also had a lot more threats, and I had a lot more opportunities to handle situations in that manner without massive risks of consequences. Because at the 2.5-year mark, when I got transferred, I went from living in places where it was 50 to 100 guys in an open warehouse style room to 2 men in a cell with solid doors. Well, there's no cameras in the cell. The cameras are in the hallways. So in the dorms, they got cameras in the dorms. They've got officers in the dorms. When you've got 2-man rooms, you can handle your business. You can settle your altercations without getting the officers or other inmates involved. You step into a room, you pull the door closed, you fight, you argue, you smoke your drugs, whatever it is you're doing, you can do it with much lower risk of getting caught. So I did choose to fight on many occasions because the risks or consequences of fighting were actually lower than the risks of not fighting. I had a roommate that brought a cell phone into my room. I was 9 months from coming home. I had a cellmate that stole all of my stuff and sold it for drugs when I was about 6 months from going home. So these things, bringing drugs into my room, put me at risk. And I did. I fought a lot in those last couple of months because I had something to fight for. I wanted to go home. I could see it. I could taste it. And I wasn't gonna let anybody
let's talk about that. Let's talk about that hope of going home. At what point did you get a release date?
I got released at 4 years, 9.5 months. And I had watched my release date get pushed back twice. I lost all of my good behavior time early on during the beginning of my second year because I got caught using a cell phone. The phone system in prison, you're only able to call people who have set up a phone account and put money on it and enabled you to call them. If your family doesn't know that they have to do that, you have no way to get a hold of them to tell them. It's kind of a catch-22 for anybody who doesn't have multiple generations of people who have been incarcerated. You go to prison, you're completely isolated. Your family's supposed to just figure out the name of the private company that handles the phone, set up an account, put money on it, on the hopes that you call them or that you know their number. It doesn't work that way. So I got on a cell phone and I called my dad to let him know I was alive, I was safe, and I needed him to set up a phone account so I could call him without risking getting in trouble. And I was a white boy who had demonstrated that he could fight really, really well. And the black gangs controlled all of the phones, the drugs. You weren't supposed to be able to get on a phone without paying to get on the phone. And I got on a phone. They were too scared of, the entire gang was too scared to pick a fight with me because of how badly I damaged the 7 people in my first altercation. That they went and told the officers that I was on the phone. They snitched on me, and the officers came running in while I had the phone in my ear. And I was too new to prison to have understood that if I had just thrown the phone across the room, they would have gotten the phone, but they would have never caught me holding it red-handed, and I wouldn't have lost any game time. I wouldn't have ended up in confinement. So, I mean, I already seen how that had gone.
All right, so let's wrap up this episode on hope. On this, you know that you're being released. Does word get out that you're going to be out in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month?
So this is actually a really sensitive topic. So the smarter people keep their release date to themselves. They'll be 3 weeks from going home, and they'll say, "Yeah, I still have 5 more years." Because when you get close to going home, there's a lot of really, really just miserable people that are in prison. I mean, there's miserable people everywhere, but when people get really jealous, and there are people that will go out of their way to stop you from going home if they know that you're going home. So if they know that you're in your last few months, they will go out of their way to set you up to get caught with drugs or a phone or to pick a fight. You're already on edge, and they don't want to see you leave. Misery loves company, if you will. So, sure. Because of the prevalence of phones in prison, it's really easy for anybody to pull you up and look you up and find out what your release date's supposed to be. Most people don't care enough to do that research, but I kept my mouth shut about when I was going home, except to a couple of the guys who had life sentences that I was real close to. They were really glad to see me going home. There's a different mentality for people who know they're never leaving versus people that might have 2, 3, 5, even 10 years. And the guys that know that they're never going home don't want anybody else to experience what it feels like to know that you're never going home.
That's really interesting, because as you were telling that story about not letting people know and jealousy, I would have thought that it was the lifers that would have not cared if you stayed or went. And you're saying that's not the case.
No, it's the exact opposite. For starters, the lifers are generally the safest people to be around. You would think they're never going home, so they're not.
I would think they have nothing to lose. So
that's what you would think. You would think they have nothing to lose. So if I accidentally offend this person, he's just going to kill me. That's what you would think. But they're never going to go home. So this is their home. And they want their home to be as peaceful and safe as it can be, because it's all they have for the rest of their life.
That's their hope.
That is their hope, is that this won't be any crazier than it already is. And so the lifers usually stay to themselves because they have that very mellow, like, this doesn't need to be any harder for the next 75 years than it already is mentality. And the guys that have less time are usually crazier. They know they're going home at some point. This isn't their home. This is just a stop on their journey, if you will. And so I became friends with the lifers because I also wanted to avoid as much chaos as possible. It's not that it was safer for me physically, because if somebody was going to pick a fight with me, they were going to pick a fight with me. But it was safer for me mentally and emotionally. The lifers generally didn't play politics. They didn't manipulate people. They just wanted peace and to be left alone. So those are the people that I connected with. They were usually quiet. They were usually older and a little bit more mature. There was a gentleman, John Trueblood. He was a Vietnam vet. For a point of reference on how old he was, he was a musician. He played in the chapel band. He had been locked up since, I don't know, the 70s. He wasn't going anywhere. It's all he knew. Most laid back, mellow, calm, like brotherly love kind of guy. Really out of the norm for what you would expect of a lifer in prison. Those were the people that I tried to surround myself with. And when I got closer to going home, when they knew, because those were the people I trusted, they were happy every single time they saw somebody get out, because they knew being housed in a cage like an animal was no way for any human being to live. They were happy for every single person who went home. And because I had earned their respect, they didn't tell anybody that I was close to going home. But when somebody during my last 3 months or 4 months would try to instigate an altercation, they actually stepped in. I never asked them to, but they stepped in and they said, if you've got a problem with Josh, you can take it up with us, because we're not going to argue with you. We're just going to kill you. So go back to your room unless you want to die, but you're not going to you're going to leave Josh alone. Like that happened a couple of times from 3 different lifers. They made sure that altercations stayed away from me my last couple of months to make sure that I went home, because they knew I would probably have hurt somebody, because I was a little bit panicky about not going home and I might have taken it too far.
How do you find trust with a lifer? I mean, most likely a lifer has committed murder. There's very few situations in which you get a life sentence and you didn't commit murder. So
wrong. Also wrong. In
okay.
fact,
Okay.
One of the lifers that I got very close with, we're now a little over 5 years that I've been home, and at least twice a year I drive across the state. I go visit him. He's a Marine Corps veteran, and he broke into a home, an unoccupied home, to steal a TV and some jewelry in order to go buy methamphetamine. The tiny little guy, 5'1", maybe 140 pounds, little guy. The homeowner, a big guy, 6'3", 200 plus pounds, came home while he was in there taking the TV and the jewelry. Tried to wrestle him and restrain him while he called the police. They got into a scuffle. He headbutt back, broke the man's nose. He got a life sentence without the possibility of parole because it went from burglary of an unoccupied dwelling to home invasion with great bodily harm the moment the man came home and he got a broken nose. And that is life without the possibility of parole. The guy didn't die. There was no real injury, no disfigurement. There was no loss of life. There was no loss of property. There was a broken nose, life sentence. So I would say that that's a common misconception, that if you have a life sentence, you did something horrible. My crime, breaking a correctional officer's nose in self-defense, is equally as severe in the eyes of the court and the legal system as if I committed rape or homicide. It is a first-degree felony. Aggravated battery on a law enforcement officer is in the exact same classification of violence and severity as murder or rape. And I was looked at the same way, as if I was a murderer or a rapist, because of the severity of my charge. Nobody cares about the details. So how do I find trust for the lifers? I found trust with the lifers because the lifers didn't have anything to prove to anybody. They weren't going anywhere. So there wasn't no ulterior motive, right? There was no ulterior motive. They had been there long enough. They knew they were going to be there long enough. Any ulterior motive, any games, any nonsense, any deception would eventually come to light and then put them in a situation where they would have to fight, they would have to kill, they would have to bring chaos into their little tiny bubble of peace they tried to create. But also, the only thing that you have of any value is your word when you're incarcerated, right? When you're locked up, your word, your reputation for integrity determines how easy or how hard your time's going to be. And if you get a reputation for lying, manipulating, or doing things, that'll only work for so long before nobody wants to interact with you, and you can't get what you need. Everything in prison is based on a barter system. You have to interact with people, and it's a very hard, very lonely existence if you burn your own reputation. So the guys who are lifers, they can't get away from their reputation. So they're very careful to say what they mean what they say. Most of them don't say a whole lot. When they do, they're very clear about what it is that they're communicating. So trusting them was very easy because they had nothing to lose by being honest. They had no ulterior motives, because any ulterior motives would have ultimately jeopardized their reputation. And so anything that they did was generally focused on peace, stability, and just being as easy as possible for everybody. Most of the lifers were the ones that would make sure they fed the people around them when they were able to get extra food from the chow hall. The lifers were the ones that would try to de-escalate situations before somebody got hurt. The lifers are the ones that would try to talk the officers down before somebody went to confinement or they went nuts ripping rooms apart for something. The lifers are the ones that kept everything calm and peaceful. So that's where the trust came from. The lifers were actually the only people that I could consistently trust or rely on, even if I didn't like them or they didn't like me. It was easy to trust the lifers because they had nothing else.
They were the elders.
And some of them weren't elder, but they were.
I just meant in that role, not necessarily from the age.
But in that role, they were the elders. And some of the lifers were there for some really despicable things. But if you did something really despicable at 17 or 18 years old and you're 70 now, I mean, I'm 35 and I'm not the same person I was at 30. You can't look at somebody who was 17 that, you know, that killed somebody at 17 in gang related activity who's now 70 and say, you're still this horrible monster. You're not the same person. So yes, most of them were the elders. Many of them had done horrible things. A few of them had not. Wrong place, wrong time, judge having a bad day. But those are the guys that I trusted. The people that tried to show me that I could trust them were usually the people that I couldn't trust. But bringing it back to hope, it was the little things that you focus on. And I picked that up from the lifers because when you take the hope of going home out of the equation, what did they have to keep them afloat? What did they focus on? And that's what I looked at. The lifers focused on the little things you could control, the little tiny things in life, the little things like, you know what? I hope that we have red Kool-Aid tonight instead of water. Something sweet. Oh, I hope that we have real banana in the banana pudding tonight. You know, we haven't had real bananas in 6 months. That's a little thing. Oh, I hope that we get Officer so-and-so tonight because they'll leave the TV on all night and they won't come around and bother anybody. It'll be a quiet night. That's a little thing. Oh, I hope that they open the canteen window in the rec yard so I can get out of the dorm, walk around and be by myself instead of being stuck in here with everybody. Those are little things. Those aren't monumental things to hope for. It was little things. Oh, I hope that they let us go to the chapel tonight. We're supposed to have a fantastic volunteer that does a very lively music-filled service, and I get to leave prison mentally and be around civilians that are just there to hug me, love me, and give me something to hope for. Like those are the little things. And then I learned that there's no atheists in prison. So I'm an atheist, and I had been an atheist when I was younger, but there's no atheists in prison. Religion, any religion, all religions are not designed to reach the masses who have things going right. Religion has always been designed to target the most vulnerable people and provide a structure for hope, even if the hope is fake. So if you've studied any religion, it's all about the poor, the homeless, the suffering. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, all of the stories are targeting people that are in a dark spot and how they can make it better. And so you've got guys that committed rape or molested kids. You've got murderers. You've got druggies. It didn't matter what anybody was locked up for or what they had done. The one thing that the vast majority of people found solace in or gave them momentary hope, even if it wasn't real, was religion. Everybody had a Bible in their hand, or a Quran, or a Torah. Everybody walked around with a Bible. They would hide behind the Bible. They would go do something stupid, masturbate in public, and then they would pick up their Bible like it was okay. But the Bible was a common factor everywhere. Every prison, tons of Bibles everywhere. And people would go to the chapel because that gave them the moment of hope. The volunteers would come in and they would preach messages of love and freedom from bondage and breaking of chains, and being born again and forgiven and washed clean and all of the wonderful, beautiful things that would come with salvation. And in a place that dark, even a false hope offered in front of you like a carrot on a stick was something that generally everybody grabbed at. I know I did. I found hope in the chapel. I'm raised Jewish. I don't really believe in any organized religion at this point. I identify as a Jew because of culture, bloodline, tradition, and history, not religion. I was an Orthodox Jew with the yarmulke that I wore all the time. I wore tzitzits. I did fill-in prayers 3 times a day. But I was also the Orthodox Jew that attended every single Christian service, the Catholic service, the Pentecostal service, the Apostolic service, the Southern Baptist service, every single day. Every one of those was a moment to be around humans that treated me like a human, not like a number in a warehouse. And I ended up in the praise and worship band. I was the Orthodox Jew playing with a Christian band at Christian services. And that was where I found the most hope for me. That was where I found joy. That was the only light in the darkness. And I focused on that harder than anything else. Every single day was, am I going to get to put my hands on a guitar in the chapel if I do this? Is this going to stop me from touching a guitar? And I got up there almost every day. I only got to play for 10 minutes maximum, and then I sat through a service, but I clung to the idea of a benevolent, loving something in the universe, because I was in a place that had very little benevolence and very little love, and kindness from the weirdest of places, but not a hell of a lot of it. And I clung to that too. I have no shame in saying that I clung to religion during my time that I was incarcerated. I'm not a religious person. I don't believe in God, and am not a hypocrite for having been devoutly religious during that time, because that created hope for something better, whether I made it out of prison or not.
Well, it sounds like it gave you, even for the moment, a sense of normalcy. And I think that's probably the reason why you were involved in all of those different services, because it was that escape to the normalcy, to have someone, as you described, that would hug you and love you and give you that moment. So I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay.
We're going to end with this question. It's a yes or no. And then we will address the answer in a later episode. When you were released, when you walked through, and I'm just going to describe, what you see in the movies. You tell me before I ask the question if the movies do it justice. You walk through the gates, they close behind you. You're on the outside. You're not on the inside. Is that accurate?
It's accurate enough.
Then we get to the final question of the episode. When you were on the outside, did you have hope that you could rebuild your life?
I'm not sure how to answer that, because it was such a sensory overload, and I was terrified of the obstacles I was going to face rebuilding my life, that I was my plan, my focus, my personal ability was limited to a day at a time. The mountain of consequence, that every single person who is convicted of a crime has to face, the sentence doesn't end when you walk out of those doors. That's when the sentence begins.
We'll leave it there. We'll pick up this conversation in a later episode when we get to your life after prison. Losing Privilege, episode 6. 7 is coming up next. Losing Privilege is a 12-part podcast series telling the fascinating story of Joshua Elishev and his roller coaster life of success and deception, love and loss, and the determination to survive prison and build a life after nearly losing his own. Visit JoshuaElishiv.com. That's Joshua, ELYASHIV.com for details on his book, Privilege Lost, his music, and upcoming projects. And listen and watch all 12 episodes of his podcast, Losing Privilege.